I'd like to begin with a statement paraphrased from the work of German sociologist and philosopher Jürgen Habermas. Quote, "Once naturalized, communication technology becomes as seemingly innocuous as nature." End quote. What comes to mind when you hear this? Think for a second. In fact, even pause the video and think or look up what you need to fully feel like you understand the idea. Got it? Good. So let's unpack it. Now, by communication technology, Habermas means any form of technology that mediates exchange between individuals or groups. So in the broadest sense, really, not just social media and email, but telephones, telegraphs, the printing press, and even writing utensils such as pencils and quills. So pencils and pens have become so permeated in our lives in the Western world that it would be hard to imagine not having the ability to write things down using alphabetic text that others in your group also understand and create shared meaning around. Imagine a week without a pen, a week without a phone. We might not feel like our lives have changed that much over the last decade or so, but try a week without your phone and see how your life changes. The changes are so incremental, so seemingly innocuous, that the full effect of the communication technology takes years, even decades, to achieve. In resistance to the introduction of new communication technologies is not unique to the way previous generations might feel towards our smartphones. TV was supposed to make everyone dumb, the printing press was supposed to usurp the power of the church by granting literacy to all, and the written word itself, as the philosopher Plato famously argued in his dialogue The Phaedrus, would erode our memory and spell the end of true knowledge once and for all. But over decades and centuries, communication technologies get adapted. People evolve and forget the mechanisms by which the technology entered and even affected our lives in the first place. A significant aspect of technical writing, both as a scholarly field and as an area of practice in a wide variety of industries, is paying close, deep attention to what we'll call the ideology of technology, or the sets of explicit and implicit socially constructed beliefs about a given technology. So in terms of writing and communication, thinking deeply about the ideologies underlying each communication technology not only opens up an ethical dimension by which you have to evaluate the goodness of a tool, but also helps you, as an individual, become cognizant of the ways in which the technology you surround yourself with and use to maintain a network of connections frames your social existence for the better or for the worse. So by way of example, let's think about the most innocuous and mundane of all the communication technologies, email. Nobody likes email. We've never heard someone say, "Oh great, another email. Very excited to spend time addressing this issue or conversing with this person." Now, there are emails that are exciting. Emails for faraway family with attached photos, emails notifying you of acceptances into a given program, emails notifying you of an employer's interest in scheduling an interview. But by and large, email is a cacophony of to-dos and obligations that might leave us feeling buried or swamped by tasks. Now, this is ironic. Email originally started for internal communication and for government agencies, and then expanding out to AOL and Hotmail in the 90s to allow public users to send emails for leisure, was never meant to become this. Email was often branded and sold for its appeal to connect with people from afar, save on postage, and share media not accessible through envelopes. It was meant to sustain connections, to make connecting with others easier and less onerous. Now, some lamented the loss of handwritten letters, including yours truly, but by and large, the convenience factor was large enough for people to buy in. And even at its outset, email was predominantly not used for work. Over time, however, organizations realized that sending emails is much more expedient than sending memos and placing them in work mailboxes. So the line, if you've heard it, "I didn't get the memo," is often used in humorous contexts, like when someone shows up to work on October 31st, not in costume, in an office, made my joke, "Didn't get the memo." It implies a sheer lack of efficiency in print-based communication for workplace tasks. Employers started using emails and even hosting their own servers, but people still had a work email and a personal email. Some of us still might. This is pretty common. We might use our Old Dominion email for speaking with professors and our Gmail accounts for all other things. But many people find this inefficient and set up their accounts so that messages to any of their 2 to 10 email addresses get filtered into one, most likely the one set up as the main account on your phone. So now, while your phone has myriad uses, you're technically bringing work with you everywhere. Out for dinner, to a friend's house, on vacation, waiting in line at Starbucks. Work is with you in private and public spaces outside of the actual workplace. For many, this makes things easy. Cuts down on the amount of work on Monday morning by keeping a glance at what's to come your way that week. But in reality, what is happening is the line between workspaces and leisure places, work time and leisure time, is collapsing. if it's not fully collapsed already. Employers and teachers know you have an email on your phone, so 24 hours without a response to a critical task might be frowned upon. But if it's after 5 p.m. or 10 p.m. or on a Saturday, then what obligation or sense of obligation do you have to respond? Email as a communication technology has become so ubiquitous, so embedded into our everyday work and leisure lives that we can't leave work at work and we don't really know how this all happened. We see our friends, quote unquote, shutting down for a weekend or leaving their phones at home. We all just wanted to use AOL Messenger to send pictures to our grandma back in Indiana, but now look at us. How did this happen? If someone proposed a new technology back in 1994 that promised to make you feel guilty, make you feel like you can never leave work at work, would you sign up for that? Well, actually, some would have, and it would be those who subscribe to the ideology of efficiency. That all technology and all time we have should be optimized at all times to be as productive as possible. But this is not most of us. The technology of email has part and parcel with it a conjoint ideology of efficiency that, without regulation or constraint, permeates our lives and blurs boundaries we had previously established, and worked hard to do so. This is how ideology often works, specifically with communication. Not on a pulpit or lectern, not shouting at public town hall meetings or State of the Union addresses, but invisibly, subtly, without notice. Not paying careful attention to the mundanity of our everyday experiences with communication technologies, forms, documents, and other sundry things, has us run the risk of being subject to ideologies external to our desires and current belief structures. So, as Judith Yaros Lee states, quote, email presses against the boundaries of work and play. In a culture that has seen the work week increase and leisure decline, this paradox of electronic communication points to one of contemporary life's greatest ironies. Labor-saving devices make more work, end quote. This is what Habermas means when he points to the innocuousness of change, the naturalization of radical change through repeated exposure and reliance. The process of naturalization takes time, but scaffolded as it was with emails, the changes are difficult to know. The ideology is difficult to see. Now, oftentimes, the ideology of technology is more pronounced than it is with email. The ramifications can be much more severe. The example I'm about to show you has nothing to do with emails, but is connected to our discussion by way of the various ideologies attached to technologies and other processes that are seemingly value-free. Okay, so we're going to make a bit of a left turn here from talking about emails to talk about something else that is very seemingly innocuous in the public eye, right? So the theme here is technical writing as being able to kind of uncover, be it through technology or through documentation, the kind of innocuous, seemingly naturalized, invisible aspects of writing that we often take for granted. And one of those things is the census. So every 10 years, the United States takes a census of all the people living within the borders. And the purpose of that is to obviously gain an understanding of how many people that they have. But the census is more than just keeping tabs on how many people are in the country. You know, is it up to 340 million yet? Is it up to 350 million yet? It's more than just that. They use the census to identify different districting and different ways of kind of moving about resources. So if there's large population chains, which there kind of has been over the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, changes in kind of urban versus rural living spaces, changes in more kind of populous cities happening. The government needs to know this, right? And the census is the main way to do it. So it takes place every 10 years, and as soon as it's over with, by the time they get through analyzing the data and sharing the data, they're kind of starting with it all over again. So there's an interesting discussion happening with the census, and it has been happening for some time, right? This isn't necessarily specific to any specific year of the census, is how we keep track of something as important as race and ethnicity. Because on the census, you're not just noting that you exist and where you live, but you're also noting your ethnic origin, what race you identify with, what gender you identify with, and other types of demographic information that the government sees as very useful to know in terms of kind of distributing resources. So these documents, right? So when you're thinking of a census, it might evoke some semblance of kind of, nothing could be more banal, nothing could be more boring. It's just kind of recording your own information about yourself. But when it comes to race and ethnicity specific of Hispanic origin, it gets a bit more complicated, because not everyone thinks about race and ethnicity in the same way, right? We're not all kind of shared this one vision about here's the difference between an ethnicity and a race, and here's how the government thinks those are different, and here's how that's different from how you're conceiving of it, right? Not everyone has these kind of in-depth understanding of it. So what you see here is Figure 1, which is a reproduction of the questions of Hispanic origin and race from the 2010 census. So you see here, what you see is a separation between the origin, so you're kind of an ethnicity, and then the person's race as well, of which you could choose Black, White, African American, or Negro, American Indian, Alaska Native, and all the other options kind of go down for a specific page. So that obviously means that you have knowledge of that, but also are able to understand specifically what the difference is between, between Hispanic, Latino, Spanish origin, and what the difference is between the origin and actual race. So what there's a proposed change for is not necessarily distinguishing between race or ethnicity on the actual census itself. So there's this proposition put forward for the 2020 census, so again, it's once every 10 years, where it actually mixes the race and ethnicity into one aspect of the census. So you could see here, and you could stop, pause it, zoom in, or that these PDFs are available, right? You're choosing one of these following, right? You're choosing either white, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, Black, Asian, American Indian, Middle Eastern, Native Hawaiian, right? Some other race or ethnicity. So you have all these options, right? And what that does here, specifically in terms of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, is now they're kind of identifying as specific one, right? So not necessarily just distinguishing between race and ethnicity, because it kind of gets confusing, and the way a lot of individuals identify in terms of their race is not necessarily the same in terms of the conversation with ethnicity. And this is extremely meaningful, right? So the Census Bureau obviously rejected that suggestion, and they're going to kind of keep it as is for the 2020 census. So, and they have their reasons. There's an article on that I've shared with you. So you think, why is this important that we pay attention to these kind of seemingly innocuous documents? What you see at the end of the actual information of the census, right here, if you read through the paragraph, all levels of government need information on Hispanic origin and race to implement and evaluate programs or enforce laws such as Civil Rights Voting Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, Equal Employment Opportunity Act, and the 2010 Census Redistricting Data Program. Both public and private organizations use Hispanic origin and race information to find areas where groups may need special services and to plan and implement education, housing, health, and other programs that address these needs. And they even provided an example there. For example, a school system might use this information to design cultural activities that reflect the diversity in their community, or a business could use it to select the mix of merchandise it will sell in a new store. Census information also helps identify areas where residents might need services of particular importance to certain racial or ethnic groups, such as screening for hypertension or diabetes. So it's more than it's more than just kind of what your own personal preference is for how you identify. The government needs to know this information for critical infrastructural decisions, and something as, again, seemingly as natural or innocuous as kind of merging these two questions or separating these questions can mean the difference between individuals of a specific race or ethnicity having access to actual government resources, having an education that is reflective of their own culture and the cultural diversity of that specific area of the city or the county or the state, right? These are all decisions that are based upon census data. So while it seems like a document that seems like something that would just be just like filling out a form at a doctor's office, or you're just kind of filling out information, because of the critical nature of this documentation and because of the conversation that's happening right now, it's a very good example about how kind of invisible, naturalized documentation actually can have profound impacts on the way the world works.